How's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you on a Thursday night. Let's light up the darkness. Reminder, no class tomorrow, Friday. No class Saturday. Nina and I are going to be away at a Shabbaton with our shul. We'll resume, God willing, on Sunday at the regular time. But we're 2 pages ahead, so when we resume, we'll be right on schedule. Who's in the house on a Thursday night? Meaning it's Yom Shishi. It's already Friday. Sharon in New Jersey, Bella in Florida, Paula in the Great Northwest, Bill in Mid-Missouri, Paula with the hearts and flags, Karen in Northern California, Shandora in the Bronx, Belle in Texas, Jonathan in Southern California, Lucy in Minnesota, Guy in Ohio, Rochelle in Modesto, Joseph in Massachusetts, Chaim in Florida, Marjorie in Virginia, Aoife in Florida. Welcome, everybody. Tonight's episode of AT Daily sponsored by our good friend Sue Strauss in the house. Beautiful dedication for the healing of all Israel and pray for true peace and healing worldwide. Amen. Thank you so much, Susan, for enabling us to share more Torah with more people around the world. In the merit of this, may you and all your loved ones be showered in blessings. And we say Amen. We are opening on page 30 here in Tractate Bava, Kamma, the 21st volume of the Talmud. We're in chapter 3 today, covering Mishnahs 3 and 4. Of chapter 3, God willing. Mishnah number 3. In the case of one who pours water in the public domain and another person incurred damage due to it, so the one who poured the water is liable to pay for his damage. In the case of one who conceals a thorn or a piece of glass in his wall adjacent to the public domain, or one who puts up a fence of thorns, or one who puts up a fence that subsequently fell into the public domain, and others incur damage due to any of these, he is liable to pay for their damage. Again, very similar to what we said yesterday. You put your stuff in the public domain, it causes damage to others. It's going to be like a pit, right? Because it's not in motion, so we're not comparing it to fire or to an ox. It's likened to a pit. Now, Rav is going to raise this objection that, well, the law of the pit is if an animal falls into it, okay, you're liable for that. But if somebody's vessels fall into it and break, you're not liable for that. So are we going to say that when you put your stuff in the public domain, it has to very directly cause the damage and only to a person, or we're not going to hold you liable? No, because as we'll see, the halacha does not accord with Rav in this matter. It accords with Shmuel, as it generally does in monetary matters. Let's continue with the Gemara. With regard to the case of one who pours water in the public domain, Rav says they taught that he is liable only when the clothes of the one who slipped were soiled by the dirty water directly. But if the one who slipped himself was injured, the one who poured the water is exempt, as it is the impact with the ground that injured him and not the water, right? The water didn't directly harm him. The ground is what harmed him. That's Rav's point of view. It's pretty, that's a pretty technical argument that Rav is making. And the sages overruled him on it. The law is going to follow Shmuel in this. And where did the law, let's just say, where did the law end up on this? On one who pours water. If one pours water in the public domain and another person is physically injured, even if it is by impact with the ground, he is liable in accordance with Shmuel's opinion that one is liable to pay for injury caused by a pit, even if the injury is caused by impact with the ground. And this is the law, even if one poured the water during the period when it is permitted for him to do so, and even if he renounced ownership of the water, if another's items are damaged, for example, if his clothes get soiled from the water, he is exempt in accordance with the law of the pit. So it really follows the law of the pit, and if the pit damages vessels, or if this water damages vessels, then no liability. But if somebody slips and falls, then there is liability. So there's a lot of nuance here. I stated it a little bit wrong, but let's keep reading. Rav Huna said to Rav, why should he be exempt from paying restitution for the injury, right? According to Rav, it's the ground that causes the injury if you slip in the puddle. Even if the water that he poured is considered only like his filth that he tossed into the public domain, he should be liable, since the muddy ground caused the injury, and the mud belongs to him as it results from the addition of his water to the dirt. He should be liable. Rav responded, do you maintain that this is a case where the water was not absorbed into the ground? It is a case where the water was absorbed, leaving only moist dirt. Since there is no mud there that can be deemed as belonging to the one who spilled the water, he is exempt from liability. So, okay, now you can understand Rav a little bit better. What hazard? Okay, poured some water on the street. The water got absorbed into the ground. The dirt is a little moist, so that if you slip and fall into that dirt, your clothes will get dirtier than if the dirt was perfectly dry. But it's not a tripping hazard. So the Gemara asks, but if the Mishnah's ruling, hold on a second. Yeah. But if the Mishnah's ruling refers only to the soiling of the pedestrian's clothes, why do I need two Mishnayos to state this law? According to Rav, this law was already addressed in the previous Mishnah with regard to the jug that broke, causing a pedestrian to fall and his clothes to become soiled. We did that yesterday. So the Gemara answers, one law was stated with regard to a case where this occurred in the summer, the dry season, and one with regard to a case where it occurred in the rainy season. And the laws in an ancient city about what you can dump in the street and what you can't vary from season to season depending on, is rain going to come and wash it away or not, right? They didn't have the sanitation trucks and the street sweepers coming by and cleaning the street. Only the rain did that. So as it is taught in a Baraisa with regard to all those people who engage in activities that the sages stated are permitted, i.e., those who open their gutters and drain the sewage from their houses into the public domain, and those who flush out the water from their caves where foul-smelling water was stored, and they do this into the public domain. So, during the summer, they do not have permission to do this, while during the rainy season, they do have permission to do it, since the street is rained upon in any event and thereby washed. And although all these people perform their actions with permission in the rainy season, if they cause damage, they are liable to pay for it, right? They can't claim, well, the sages said we can dump our water in the street. Yeah, but the sages didn't say you can create a hazard that passersby are going to slip and fall in. Yes, in the winter, you can put stuff in the street. You can dump your water, your foul cave-smelling water, your sewage, etc. But if somebody is harmed thereby, you remain liable, even though you had permission, seasonal permission, to generally speaking put it out there, but not in a way that causes people to get injured. Now, it is stated in the Mishnah that one who conceals a thorn or a piece of glass, or one who puts up a fence of thorns, is liable to pay for damage resulting from them. So Rabbi Yochanan says they taught that he is liable only in a case where he projects these obstacles into the public domain. But if he restricts them to his own property, he is not liable. And the Gemara asks, what is the reason that he is exempt? And Rav Acha, the son of Rav Ika, says it is because it is not the typical manner of people to rub against walls, but to keep a certain distance from them. Therefore, if a pedestrian is wounded by the thorns, it is considered an unusual accident for which the owner of the fence is not liable. The sages taught in Tosefta 2:6 with regard to one who conceals his thorns or his pieces of glass in the wall of another person. And the owner of the wall came and demolished his wall, and it fell into the public domain, and the thorns or glass caused damage, the one who concealed them is liable. I'm having a little trouble getting the picture of this. Who is concealing their thorns or glass in the wall of another? Like, what does that even mean, right? So it's like you're creating a cubby, you're creating sort of a locker, right, in somebody else's wall on the public thoroughfare. And so you're stashing your thorns, which, you don't want to leave lying around because people could step on them. So, okay, you put them in a wall. They're concealed in a wall. They're in the wall. Okay, so people aren't going to rub up against the wall. But then the wall falls down. Okay, so now the wall falls down, the glass and thorns spill out, and passersby now get injured by these thorns or glass now in the public domain. So who's liable? The guy who put that dangerous stuff in the wall or the owner of the wall? I mean, you'd have to think the one who owns the thorns and the glass. Maybe he didn't stash them in such a sensible spot. But let's keep reading. So Rabbi Yochanan says, they taught this only in the case of an unstable wall, that the owner of the wall might be liable. Since the one who concealed his items should have anticipated that the owner of the wall would soon demolish it. But in the case of a stable wall, the one who concealed his items is exempt, and the owner of the wall is liable. So the owner of the wall had a stable wall. Other people stashed their thorns and glass in his wall. The wall falls, and now he's liable? Why? Ravina says, that is to say, that in the case of one who covers his pit with another person's bucket, and the owner of the bucket came and took his bucket, and the pit now causes damage, the owner of the pit is liable, not the owner of the bucket. And the Gemara asks, well, isn't this obvious? This is exactly the same law as Rabbi Yochanan's statement with regard to one who conceals thorns in an unstable wall, i.e., that the hazardous item was likely to be revealed from the moment that it was concealed, and therefore its owner is liable to pay for any damage that it causes. What is the novel element of Ravina's statement? Let's unpack that. If I dig a pit in the public domain and I leave it uncovered, okay, and then I'm like, well, that's dangerous, so I need to cover my pit. But I don't cover it with my own stuff. I don't go find a board or my own bucket. I cover the pit with somebody else's bucket. So he comes along, he's like, that's my bucket. He picks it up and leaves. Now he exposed my pit. Somebody falls in the pit. They get hurt. Who's liable? I didn't leave an open pit, but I used property that wasn't my own to cover it. That's why I'm going to be liable. Okay, now, who, with the owner of the thorns and the glass and the owner of the wall, who's who? Sounds like the guy who owns the thorns and the glass is like the owner of the pit. What did he do? He covered it, with somebody else's property. He stashed it in somebody's wall. Okay, so now the wall falls down. Now, if the wall was unstable to begin with, obviously the guy who stashes thorns and glass in an unstable wall that was ready to fall down, he's going to be liable. But why are you going to say that if he stashed it in a stable wall and then the wall falls down, that the owner of the wall is liable? I could see you saying, well, the owner of the wall is liable if his wall falls down and people trip over the rocks. But what about the thorns and glass? I'm a little unclear. Let's keep reading. So the Gemara answers, it was necessary to state both these cases. Why? Lest you say it is only there, in the case of the thorns, that the owner of the wall is exempt, since he did not know who concealed the hazardous item in order to inform him that he should remove them. But here, since the owner of the bucket knew who dug the pit, he should have informed him that he was taking his bucket and is consequently liable to pay for damage caused by the pit. So Ravina therefore teaches us that he is not required to inform the owner of the pit, and he bears no responsibility for any damage caused. The guy who dug a pit in the public domain should not have used somebody else's property to cover it up. That person could come along and reclaim his property, and he's perfectly entitled to do so. Now the sages taught the early pious people would conceal their thorns and their pieces of glass in their fields. Yeah, that makes sense. And they would dig to the depth of at least 3 handbreadths in order to bury them so that they would not obstruct the plow. And the Gemara relates Rav Sheshes would toss his thorns into fire so that they would not cause damage to others. Rava would toss them into the Tigris. Rav Yehuda says, one who wants to be pious should observe the matters of Nezikin, right? This is the order Nezikin, Seder Nezikin. This tractate, Bava Kamma, and also Bava Mitzia and Bava Basra, generally speaking, the laws of civil liability, damages, monetary matters, right? That somebody who wants to be a pious religious person will study very carefully how to avoid causing damages to others, even in an economic framework, right? You have to understand how to keep your stuff from damaging other people, how to keep yourself from damaging other people, that those relationships between people are an important, a crucial matter for people who cleave to God and call themselves pious. Obviously, they can't go around hurting people. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 3. Here's Mishnah number 4. In the case of one who takes out his straw and his hay to the public domain to use afterward as fertilizer, and another person incurred damage due to them, he is liable to pay for his damage. And whoever takes possession of the hay and the straw first, whoever takes possession of them first, acquires them for himself. Now, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says, with regard to anyone who places obstacles in the public domain and they cause damage, he is liable to pay damages. And whoever takes possession of them first acquires them. In the case of one who turns over dung in the public domain and another person incurred damage because of it, the former is liable to pay for his damage. So what is this business about putting your straw and hay out in the public domain purposely so that people will walk over it and trample it? Because if you just dump hay on your field, it's not going to act as fertilizer. It's not going to do much of anything. But if it's ground up, the finer the better, then it has a chance with the coming of rain to sink into the soil and become fertilizer that replenishes the soil. So people would put it out there purposefully to have it ground up by the foot traffic of people going by. So you're allowed to do that, at least in some seasons. But if in doing that somebody, is damaged by your straw and hay, you're going to be liable to pay their damages. Now the Gemara on Mishnah number 4. Let us say that the ruling in the Mishnah that one is liable to pay for damage caused by straw or hay that he put in the public domain is not in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. As it is taught in a Baraisa that Rabbi Yehuda says, during the period when fertilizer is taken out, a person may take his fertilizer out to the public domain, right? He has permission, and let it accumulate there for a full 30 days so that it gets trampled by people's feet and by animals' feet. Why? Why is this allowed? Because it was on this condition that Joshua bequeathed Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel, to the Jewish people. In other words, people do not have the right to prevent someone from taking out his straw to the public domain, since they received their portion of the land of Israel following Joshua's conquest on this condition. We all own it. Apparently, since one has the right to take out his straw, he is not held liable to pay for damage caused by it. That's an argument, and the Gemara rejects it. You can even say that the Mishnah is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, since Rabbi Yehuda might concede that if the fertilizer causes damage, he is liable to pay for the damage it caused, even though he was within his rights. Right? What Rabbi Yehuda was saying was, you can put your straw and hay out there for people to trample. That doesn't mean that you're not liable if somebody gets hurt, just that you have permission to put it out there. You still have to watch how it's done. The Gemara asks, but didn't we learn in a Baraisa that Rabbi Yehuda says, if a pile of straw on the back of an animal that was passing through the public domain catches fire from a Hanukkah lamp that was placed outside a store, the owner of the lamp is exempt since he put it there with permission. And what? Is it not because he put it there with the permission of the court and is therefore exempt from paying damage caused by it? What's the difference between somebody who put his Hanukkah lamp outside and then it causes damage and he is exempt, compared to one who puts his dung or his hay or his straw outside with the permission of the court and then it causes damage? So the difference is, you put your Hanukkah lamp outside, which is the halacha, the law, according to the sages, at least in the land of Israel, during a time not of danger, meaning when our enemies are not, trying to identify who's Jewish to kill them. Who can imagine such a thing? But the difference is when you put your Hanukkah lamp outside, you're fulfilling the mitzvah, the commandment to publicize the miracle of Hanukkah. When you're putting your dung and hay and straw outside to make better fertilizer, yeah, you're just serving yourself. That's not a mitzvah in and of itself. And so the Gemara says, no, it is because he put the lamp there with the permission granted to those performing a mitzvah. Permission of the court is not sufficient to exempt him from paying damages. He's allowed to put the straw and hay out there, that he has that permission, but it doesn't exempt him from paying damages unless, in addition, permission was granted for the purpose of performing a mitzvah. As it is taught in the Baraisa, Rabbi Yehuda says that if the hay on the back of the animal caught fire from a Hanukkah lamp, the one who put out the lamp is exempt because he had permission to put it there in order to perform a mitzvah. Come in here an alternative proof from a Baraisa. With regard to all these cases in which the sages said that it is permitted for people to place obstacles in the public domain, if they cause damage, these people are liable to pay, and Rabbi Yehuda exempts them. So evidently, according to Rabbi Yehuda, if one has the permission of the court to put an item in the public domain, he is exempt from paying damages, not only for the purpose of a mitzvah, but if you have permission, you're exempt. Rav Nachman said the Mishna is referring to a case where one put his fertilizer outside, not during the period when fertilizer is taken out. Therefore, he did not have permission to do so. And it is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, who holds that one is liable only if he acts without permission. Rav Ashi said an alternative explanation of the Mishnah according to Rabbi Yehuda. What we learned in the Mishnah was specifically with regard to a case where one put out his straw and his hay, which are more likely to cause injury than fertilizer and other objects, because they are particularly slippery. Therefore, Rabbi Yehuda agrees that in this case, he is liable to pay for the damage they caused. Now we're on page 30b. It is stated in the Mishnah that if one put his straw and his hay out in the public domain, whoever takes possession of them first acquires them. So the sages disagreed with regard to the extent of this acquisition. Rav says he acquires them both with regard to the items themselves and with regard to the value of their enhancement, which took place while they were out in the public domain being trampled. That enhanced their value because they were ground down. And Zeiri says he acquires them with regard to the value of their enhancement, but not with regard to the items themselves, and he must pay the owner of the straw according to their value at the time he placed them in the public domain. Now, with regard to what do they disagree, Rav holds that the sages penalize the owner by revoking his ownership of the items themselves due to the value of their enhancement that he stands to earn by putting them in the public domain. Whereas Zeiri holds that they did not penalize him by revoking his ownership of the items themselves due to the value of their enhancement. Rather, he loses only the increase in their value due to that enhancement. So, the Gemara attempts to prove that Zeiri's opinion is correct from a case where there is no enhancement. So we learned in the continuation of our Mishnah that in the case of one who turns over dung in the public domain, and another person incurred damage due to that turned over dung, the former is liable to pay for his damage. But it does not teach in this clause that whoever takes possession of it first acquires it. So apparently, the sages did not revoke his ownership of the dung as it has no enhanced value. And this does not seem to accord with Rav's opinion. Right? So let's just remember we've got a few different variables here. What are you putting out in the street? First, we started talking about water, okay? So you don't put your water out there to enhance the value of your water. Hay and straw can become fertilizer if it is trampled enough. So you put it out there so that people will walk over it. So one of the ideas is, therefore, so it's for your benefit that you put it out there, but if it causes damage to someone, you have to pay for that. One of the policies that has been suggested, right, a penalty that's against people doing this, at least if they do it at a time when they're not permitted to do that, a time of year, for example, or in a town where they don't permit this, is that if somebody goes ahead and does it, that they've lost the rights to their own hay and straw. Now, they might still do it because they don't expect anyone to come along and pick up their hay and straw. So it gets trampled, and then they'll take it back inside. However, if somebody comes along and picks it up and takes it, well, the sages declared it ownerless as a penalty for people who are putting it out there when they're not supposed to. And the penalty is that it's ownerless so people can come along and take it. The guy will lose the rights to his own hay and straw. What about dung? Dung doesn't need people to trample over it in order to be a fertilizer. You might want to dry it out, turn it over in that sense. Maybe you're not looking for people to walk over it. Maybe you just want it outside of your barn or outside of your house. So for sure, you're going to have to pay damages if somebody's injured because of it. But has it been rendered ownerless because you put it out there? Let's keep reading. So the Gemara answers, the law that whoever takes possession of it acquires it is taught in the first clause with regard to one who puts out straw, and the same is true in the last clause with regard to one who turns over the dung. It is unnecessary to repeat it. Therefore, no support for the opinion of Zeiri can be derived from here. So the Gemara asks, but isn't it taught in a Baraisa that in that regard, i.e. a Baraisa that discusses the same cases as the Mishna, that the hay and straw are forbidden due to the prohibition against robbery, which apparently means that one may not take possession of the dung, contrary to Rav's opinion. Did the sages rule, did Rav rule, that if you put it outside, it is now ownerless, you lose your rights to it, but then come along and say, but if somebody takes it, they violated the prohibition on robbery? Well then, I thought you said it was ownerless. Which is it? The Gemara answers, when it is taught in the Baraisa that they are forbidden due to the prohibition against robbery, it applies to the entire Mishnah, not just to this particular clause. And it is referring to taking the items from the one who came along first and acquired them. So you put your hay and straw out there? The sages have declared it ownerless. You shouldn't have done that, so you lose your rights to it. You might still do it. You might still risk it. But if someone comes along and takes it, they have every right to do that. They've now acquired it for themselves. Once they pick it up off the street and put it in their wagon where they're going to take it home, it's now their property. It's not that hay and straw is ownerless and remains ownerless. The first one who takes it has acquired it. If somebody takes it from that guy, it's robbery. The Gemara asks, but it is not taught in this manner elsewhere. As we learned in a Baraisa, in the case of one who takes out his straw and his hay to the public domain to use afterward as fertilizer, and another person incurred damage due to them, he is liable to pay for his damage. Okay, got it. And furthermore, whoever takes possession of them first acquires them. And it is permitted to do so with regard to the prohibition against robbery. And in the case of one who turns over dung in the public domain, and another incurred damage due to it, he is liable. But it is forbidden to take possession of it due to the prohibition against robbery. So it seems like that's a distinction now, an outcome between hay and straw versus dung. You put your hay and straw out there because you want people to trample it. You risk that somebody will come along and take it, and they have every right to do so. You put your dung out there to turn it over or whatnot. Somebody takes that, it is robbery, right? In either case, if your stuff that you put out there causes damage, you're liable to pay. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak said, is it from the case of dung that you raise a contradiction to Rav's opinion that one may take possession of straw and hay in the public domain? With regard to an item that has value added due to the enhancement over time as a result of lying in the public domain, Rav holds that the sages penalize one who leaves it in the public domain, revoking his ownership of the item itself because of its added value due to the enhancement. But with regard to an item that does not have added value due to the enhancement by lying in the public domain, such as dung, perhaps Rav would concede that they did not penalize him in this manner. That doesn't contradict Rav. So a dilemma was raised before the sages. According to the statement of Rav, who says that they penalized him by revoking his ownership of the items themselves because of its added value due to enhancement, do we impose this penalty immediately when he takes the straw out, allowing one to take possession of it even before it has time for its value to become enhanced by lying in the public domain for a certain amount of time for people to trample it? Is it that as soon as he puts it out there, he shouldn't have done that? It's deemed ownerless and anyone can come along and take it? Or does it only, become ownerless after it's lain there for a certain number of days and its value as fertilizer has become enhanced? So come in here a proof that the penalty is imposed immediately from the fact that we spoke of a difficulty to Rav's opinion from the case of dung, whose value does not become enhanced, indicating that according to Rav, the penalty is imposed before there is any enhancement. So the Gemara responds, and how can you understand this proof? When we spoke of dung, this was before Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak resolved the difficulty, explaining that perhaps Rav concedes that there is no penalty in this case. But after Rav Nachman resolved it, is it at all possible to raise an objection to Rav's opinion from the case of dung? Therefore, no proof can be brought from there. So the Gemara suggests, let us say that this dispute is parallel to a dispute between the Tanaim, the rabbis of the sages of the Mishna, as it is stated in a Baraisa, with regard to a document in which a loan with interest is written. Right? A Jew can't lend to another Jew and charge interest. That's prohibited by the Torah. So with regard to a document in which a loan was written with interest, right? The two parties agreed to have a loan, and even before the lender gives the money to the borrower, since they're agreeing to have a loan at interest, they've already transgressed that prohibition when they wrote the document, even before the money changes hands, right? So with regard to a document in which a loan with interest is written, we penalize the lender, and he therefore collects neither the principal nor the interest. This is the statement of Rabbi Meir. And the rabbis say he collects the principal, but not the interest. So shall we say that Rav stated his opinion in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Meir, whose penalty applies to the value of the loan itself due to its enhancement, i.e. the interest, which is prohibited, and that Zeiri stated his opinion in accordance with the opinion of the rabbis who imposed the penalty only on the interest. Okay, so with regard to this loan document, the issue isn't whether they transgressed the law as soon as they wrote it. The issue is, what are we going to do now that these two Jews agreed to a loan with interest? They shouldn't have done that. It's a transgression. Are we going to say that we penalize the lender, that the borrower doesn't even have to give the money back? Or are we going to say we're going to penalize the lender, but not crazy? I mean, the borrower still has to give back the money that he borrowed, but we remove the interest from the loan, which would make it a permissible loan, an interest-free loan. Right, so Rabbi Meir says, big penalty. The lender loses everything, and the majority say, no, he doesn't get the interest that they agreed on, but he's going to get his principal back. Now, the Gemara answers that Rav could have said to you, I stated my opinion even according to the opinion of the rabbis. The rabbis were saying there that the principal is not forfeited by the lender only because the principal was loaned in a permissible manner, the interest-free loan, as the prohibition applies only to the interest. But here, in the case of one who put his straw in the public domain, the principal, meaning the straw itself, as soon as you put it out there, that is a hazardous object. People can trip over that. Therefore, the penalty should relate to the object itself. And that's what we would say, that if they said that people put straw and hay out in the public domain, that straw and hay is declared ownerless and anyone can come along and take it, that is the way the law works, because the straw and hay is not like the principal in a loan where what we want to remove is the interest. And here with the straw and hay lying in the street, we're saying that's like the principal, and its enhancement after people have trampled it is like the interest in this analogy. So are we going to just cancel the enhancement, right? And so only once it's been enhanced does it become ownerless? No, because as soon as he puts it out in the street, it already creates a hazard. So if we're going to impose this penalty of declaring it ownerless, we're going to impose it as soon as he puts it out there. And conversely, Zairi could have said to you, I stated my opinion, even according to the opinion of Rabbi Meir. And the reason that Rabbi Meir was saying there, in the case of a loan with interest, that the principal is also forfeited, is only that the prohibition was already violated from the time of the writing of the document by making an appraisal of how much money is to be repaid, which included interest. But here, in the case of the straw that one placed in the public domain, who can say that it will cause damage? It's not definitely going to cause damage. Since the damage was not inevitable at the time that the straw was placed there, there is no justification for revoking the ownership of the straw itself. So the Gemara suggests, alternatively, let us say that the dispute between Rav and Zairi is parallel to a dispute between these Tanaim, the sages of the Mishnah, as it is stated in a Baraisa in the case of one who takes his straw and his hay out to the public domain to use afterward as fertilizer, and another person incurred damage due to them, the owner is liable to pay for his damage, and whoever takes possession of them first acquires them. But they are forbidden due to the prohibition against robbery. And Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says, in the case of anyone who places obstacles in the public domain and they cause damage, he is liable to pay. And whoever takes possession of them first acquires them. And they are permitted to him, even with regard to the prohibition against robbery. And the Gemara clarifies, what you just said doesn't make sense. The matter itself is difficult. First, you said that whoever takes possession of them first acquires them. And then it says they are forbidden due to the prohibition against robbery, indicating that one may not take possession of them. So you could say that Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel's, counterclaim, or his view of it makes sense, but the majority, the way it was first stated, doesn't make sense due to this internal contradiction. So rather, is this not what the Baraisa is saying? That this statement, and whoever takes possession of them first acquires them, it is stated with regard to the value of their enhancement, right? Meaning after it's been enhanced. And this statement, but they are forbidden due to the prohibition against robbery, is stated with regard to the items themselves. And Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel came to say that even with regard to the items themselves, whoever takes possession of them first does acquire them. Therefore, this dispute among the Tanaim apparently relates to whether the penalty applies to the items themselves or just to the value of their enhancement after they've lain in the public domain for a while being trampled. So the Gemara comments, according to Zairi, it is certainly a dispute between Tanaim, since Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel explicitly deems it permitted for one to take possession of the items. According to Rav, shall we say that it is a dispute between Tanaim? The Gemara responds that Rav could have said to you, according to all opinions, the sages imposed a penalty, revoking his ownership of the items themselves due to the value of their enhancement. And here in the Baraisa, the Tanaim disagree with regard to whether or not it is ruled that this is the law, but a public ruling is not issued to that effect. As it was stated that the Amoraim, right, the sages of the Gemara, disagreed as to whether the law revoking his ownership of the items themselves should be taught to the public. Rav Huna says that Rav says, this is the law, but a public ruling is not issued to that effect. In other words, although it is permitted for one to take possession of the straw, the halakhic authorities, right, the legal authorities, the sages of the community, should not publicly rule that people may do so, lest people become accustomed to taking items that belong to others. This is the opinion of the first Tan in the Baraisa. So even though there's a policy reason, right, to discourage people from putting their hay and straw in the street to be trampled because it could cause damage, and so we might want to issue a policy that says, okay, so if someone does that, members of the public can come along and take their hay and straw as soon as it's put out there to discourage them from doing that. But countervailing, right? Just not getting the words I want in my mind today. But, balanced against that policy consideration is the idea that, do we really want to tell people that, hey, you can go and pick up somebody else's hay and straw because they shouldn't put it out in the street, so it's yours? What kind of a society are we going to create? These are two policy considerations taking into account what kind of behavior they will elicit from the public and trying to balance the harm and the benefit, right? So this is the opinion of the first Tan in the Baraisa. Rav Ada bar Ahava says this is the law, and a public ruling is issued that people can come along and take it. And this, Rav could have said, is the opinion of Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. So I'm almost done. Questions or comments, please get them in. So the Gemara asks, is that so? But didn't Rav Huna declare dried barley, known as hushale, that people laid out in the public domain? Didn't Rav Huna say that when people put their dried barley in the public domain, that the sages have declared it ownerless? And similarly, didn't Rav Ada bar Ahava declare ownerless residue from dates, right? Again, this is stuff that people might have a reason to put outside in the public domain, and we want to discourage them from doing that by saying it's ownerless and anyone can come along and claim it. Now the Gemara comments, well, granted, Rav Ada bar Ahava acted in accordance with his own halakhic opinion that although this is the law, a public ruling is not issued to that effect. But with regard to Rav Huna, shall we say that he retracted his prior opinion? And the Gemara answers, those owners of the barley were forewarned to remove the barley from the public domain, and they did not comply. Therefore, they were penalized by Rav Huna, who declared publicly that their barley was ownerless. So it was pretty and that's the conclusion of the discussion of Mishnah number 4. Tough discussion, right? A little bit hard to understand. I mean, we get the general idea that, okay, there's a time of the year when it's permitted to put your stuff out there because people trampling it will enhance its value. But even though it's permitted, if you do it and cause harm, you're going to be liable for that harm. But perhaps if too many people are doing that and too much harm is being caused, the sages come along and say, you know what, we want to stop that. So we're not going to say you can't put it out there, right? Because, Joshua led the children of Israel into the land of Israel, and now we kind of all have this joint right over the land that would include putting our stuff out there where it could be trampled. But because it caused so much harm, they said, yeah, but you know what? If you put it out there, people can come along and take it. We're going to declare it ownerless because it's a hazard. So don't be so quick to put it out there, and certainly not in a way that causes harm. Does that summarize everything we read? Maybe, but I feel like I got to go back, and I feel like there was a nuance in there that I missed, so I'll be rereading it after class. Okay, one question from Bill. Interesting. I wonder if, given our current understanding of environmental concerns, if we could extrapolate this to saying that a pious Jew has an obligation to consider how the disposal of dangerous materials might affect the broader community, not just of humans, but of the wider creation. I would say yes. Yes. I mean, we know that, for example, the Noahide law, so it's not just Jews, all people, states simply that you shall not tear a limb from the living. That's normally interpreted to mean you won't tear a limb off an animal in order to roast it and eat it, right? Only Jews have to make kosher slaughter of animals before they're permitted to eat it. Non-Jews, can kill an animal any way they want and then eat it. You can go hunting and then eat the animal. Jews can't do that. But if you, tear a limb from a living animal, then you have violated Noahide law. Now, that law is understood to be not just a law, but a broader category of laws that includes, just a general prohibition on being cruel to animals. And we also learned that if your enemy's donkey is overloaded, even though he's your enemy, you go over there and help him unload the donkey. Again, because we care for animals, we have a concern for nature. So I think that this idea that a pious Jew, has to be mindful of the environment is absolutely right. But it's, as we see in the prior discussion, it's going to be one factor, right? We're not going to say that just because, the lesser beak-nosed mole might be impacted in its, mating rituals, that we're not going to build a bullet train from, San Francisco to LA, which would do a lot of good for the people of California. It's factors that we need to balance, right? So it's definitely going to be a more complicated equation where we take all these nuances into effect. Leona Sue says, to avoid confusion, if it's not yours, then don't take it, right? Which is probably where most people end up. But this idea that and remember, this idea of something being declared ownerless and what is the result of that is also part of our discussion, because sometimes people just throw stuff out. They just throw it out there, right? And they leave it there. They don't want it. They have declared it ownerless themselves. But the sages have said you don't get off the hook just because you threw your garbage out there and said it's no longer your garbage. If it causes harm, you're still on the hook for that. Okay, that's what I've got for us tonight. And with God's help, we'll be together again on Sunday, right? No class tomorrow, Friday, no class Saturday. Nina and I will be on a Shabbaton. And with God's help, Sunday will resume at the regular time. We're coming back from that Shabbaton. If for any reason we're delayed, we'll put a notice on the page for a later time. So maybe check the time. But we anticipate that we should be back in time and that we can teach the class at 6. All the best. And good Shabbos.